and welcome to the show. We are here today on BeamNG Drive with a very high-speed challenge for you all, using a selection of mods that adds huge amounts of seriously powerful parts to a bunch of cars. We were going to be doing a speed test, but this was not just about top speed. This was going to be about average speed over the course of a 4-mile road. And to give you an idea of just how unbelievably rapid these cars can be, here is a pass from a fixed camera point of the Bastion, and it really is a case of can you miss it? It is absurd. It is truly ridiculous the speeds these cars are going to be able to do, but as I said, this is average speed. So you've got to maintain it throughout the course of the run. Stevie would be up first, driving the Barstow. Now, this has a respectable amount of horsepower. 2,434. Don't worry, the number's going to get sillier as we go along. Although, admittedly, that was in its most powerful guise. Each car was going to be given 3 runs to complete this course, with the fastest, the fastest run being used. You could make little modifications, so for example Stevie was upping the nitro as they would go through the runs, giving the car more and more power. This road, as I said, it's a 4-mile road, but it is not perfectly straight. It is not perfectly flat. It is quite challenging. So you are going to have to potentially brake or lift for some of these corners, figure out what speed you can physically take them before accelerating again, all in a car that is really built to go as fast as possible in a straight line. Handling has not been taken into consideration for a lot of these cars. For a lot of these cars, it's rather an afterthought, as they have truly monstrous levels of power. You can see the Barstow here is moving around so much, and this road, you can see the bumps, you can see the hills. There's dirt just off the tarmac, and Stevie gets it a little bit wrong around the final corner, managing to get it up onto its side. It comes crashing back down. It's not the biggest shunt you could possibly have in this one for the Barstow, although it goes for an extra flip at the end there, as it will spin. I mean, it crossed the line. Technically speaking, it did cross the line, but yeah, not quite an ideal run here for the Barstow. However, there would be some clean runs for the car, as still you can see just nothing wants to go in a straight line. The Barstow up onto 2 wheels again, going through these corners. Sometimes you've just got to put your foot down and hope you're still not in a straight line. I don't think at any point, there's maybe a moment there where it's just about going in a straight line. But you can see the way the road curves. You're going to have to deal with it. You have to brake for the final corner, and Stevie's struggling with rear end grip. The replay, these cars are so powerful, the replays do sometimes have issues with showing cars having popped tyres. Stevie doesn't here. But it's a huge moment, not quite got over this time around for the Barstow, and it's across the line for Stevie. Average speed over 4 miles, 254 miles an hour, is a good benchmark. For the rest of the cars to try and beat. Because in the third run, well, you know what's going to happen. Trying to go a little bit faster. The Barstow up on 2 wheels through the petrol station corner. A very easy place to have an accident. Almost gathers it back up and then finds a post and litters the desert with bits of car. It was a big explosion of parts. Stevie almost got away with it. I mean, it was running wide at the petrol station corner is going to be a recurring theme, you will see, because these cars are hitting it at about, well, depending on the car, you're hitting it anywhere from 260 to 300 miles an hour. So it's a big corner to try and get right. Now, Gliscor would go a slightly different route with this one. This is the ESBR4. It is the only electric car being run in this. Now, the game does say it has 1,013 horsepower, which would make it the least powerful vehicle here. However, the power-to-weight thing that we use the game doesn't really calculate electric motors' power correctly. So, truthfully, we're not really sure how much power the car has. Being an SBR4 does have a lot of downforce, does have an awful lot of grip. Gliscor's theory, not necessarily a terrible idea, was to go for this higher grip car while still being very, very fast, and you'd have control. In fact, Gliscor could pretty much be flat out through here and not have too many issues, unlike you saw with the Barstow, and you will see with cars wiggling and having all sorts of issues trying to keep their vehicles in a straight line. This thing much more composed. This thing much more controlled as it heads around the final corner and would run across the line, and it would be at average speed 236.14 miles an hour. Again, astonishing speeds for these vehicles. In fact, the first two runs were very, very similar from Gliscor in this one. So as we head into the third round, well, being an electric car, it can go quite fast in reverse. So why not at least start off the run going in reverse? The downside with this is, of course, because the aero's designed for going the other way, it's actually starting to try and lift the back of the car up here, which is somewhat problematic, to say the least, although it is rather difficult to try and keep it under control when you're at about 150. So everybody was doing about that speed in reverse. However, the high-speed J-turn did not quite go according to plan. Got it back facing the right way, but you're going so quickly at this point that, well, yeah, problems would occur for the SBR4, and that would end up also detonated in pieces. Now, Shados had gone for a very different route to the rest of us. I mean, technically speaking, the only diesel vehicle in this T-Series is the most powerful vehicle here. 13,400 horsepower, essentially, is going on in this truck. That is so much power. And as you can imagine, it does have a rather profound effect on the amount of speed this vehicle can do. In fact, the first couple of runs would go relatively smoothly. You've got to bear in mind here that this is a truck going at speeds no truck should ever go. I feel like the air alone would probably rip the cab off the truck. But regardless, it is capable, and it's surprisingly controlled, given everything. The immense amount of power does make it very fast in a straight line, but unsurprisingly, it does have some handling issues. Quite significant handling. I say that through the corners, despite the speed it is able to take. Average speed from this truck, 262 miles an hour from a T-Series truck. That is monstrous. But as you can see, it did not have slicks. I don't think it could have slicks because it would grip roll if it did. But yeah, absolutely crazy. Of course, when you are trying to go faster than that in terms of average speed, you are maybe going to take a few more gambles, and, well, as you can perhaps expect, if you get things wrong in a truck like this, you're going to have a big accident, and yep, the T-Series detonates and shreds bits of bodywork far and wide around the map. I think the engine may have even made it to, like, the motorhomes, into the little racetrack bit. Yeah, that corner is dangerous. That corner is tricky. It's so easy to run wide at the speeds you're going. The tiniest mistake is going to be a huge problem. Amy would be up next with the Moonhawk. The second most powerful vehicle here, 7,200 horsepower, twin supercharged V8 in this one. You already see it bouncing around and getting upset, and for Amy it was a similar moment, although better held for the Moonhawk. Amazingly, despite taking flight for a little while and still struggling to get the car back on the circuit and collapsing suspension, and I believe it was an actual punctured tyre as well in this one, the Moonhawk got back on the road and would carry on. I mean, lost a lot of time, and handling left a lot to be desired as we head around the final corner, but mighty impressive to have been able to get away with such a moment there, for the Moonhawk to have survived. I mean, the nearest miss so far. I mean, it was a crash of sorts, but to have actually recovered a drivable car, very, very impressive. Now, you might be interested to know about the start procedure, because we've got a slightly different start procedure. The way this one was working, because we were trying to keep it a little bit fair between rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive cars, you could run what you wanted. The start procedure for this was you could start wherever you wanted. You had to be under 100 miles an hour when you crossed the milk that we used as the start line. Once you got to that start line, you could then boot it however you pleased. So we had this sort of little staging area to have a rolling start and keep things fair between everybody. The Moonhawk was an absolute monster. There is no two ways about it here. It is truly rapid. It struggled with control issues, as you can see here. Absolutely sending it. There was airtime, it was on the dirt a little bit, it's still twitching and wiggling about all over the place, desperately trying to put that power down, trying to get turned into a corner where you can. It's a little bit wide on the final corner, but we'll keep foot down, heading across the line, and it's having a big wiggle. It is the first car to average, again, this is average, over 300 miles an hour, 303.03 over the course of a 4-mile road, including some off-roading for the Moonhawk. Absolutely mad. Ewan would be up next with a fascinating contraption. This is the Blackpool Superlight. Now, it is supposed to be a Caterham, but Ewan got carried away with modifying it, and with it just looks like a Hot Wheels car. Very cool. Very cool little contraption, and I'm surprised you can get to this level of customizing it to end up making it look like this. Quite where the driver would be, let's not ask those questions. Not in the car. I don't think I want to be in any of these cars. Not doing this. But there we go. It's got silly big wheels. I mean, there was a bunch of issues with this one, chief among which, well, you can see it has problems with wanting to flip over at these kind of speeds. It's not the most stable. You will see some vehicles will run aero. While that will reduce your top speed, it will keep you better under control. This doesn't have those luxury. Also, big tyres like this exposed. Like, grip rolling is a real potential problem for this car. As Ewan comes around the final corner in one of the most bizarre looking contraptions here, it'll be across the line. It was 244 miles an hour average speed, and in fact it was the first of the 3 runs for Ewan that would be the quickest of all of them, because, well, perhaps unsurprisingly, this vehicle is not particularly easy to drive. The other weird characteristic it had, because it's bouncing and vibrating so much, when you fired the nitro, the rear wheels would often be vibrating off the ground, and the nitro would basically keep cutting in and out. So it's very difficult to keep a consistent power. Petrol station corner, claiming another victim. Ewan ran wide, and the engine's already been spat out of the car in this one as it tumbles and rolls to a stop. Not the most horrific of the crashes we could have, but I do love that for whatever reason the cinematic camera decided to try its best and follow where the engine ended up. It's just bouncing through the desert. Yeah, that was a monumental shunt for the car. Now, for the final run, Ewan whacked up the nitro, removed any bits of bodywork they could to try and keep the engine cool, because it was actually overheating by the end of the run, so Ewan had to also minimise power, or minimise the amount of throttle used. However, on this run, something weird would happen. The engine would cut out. Now, it was believed that it had just exploded. Not exactly unreasonable. This car was struggling with overheating, had suddenly whacked a whole load of nitro into it. The expectation was the car had exploded, the engine had exploded from all of this, but it was carrying like 200 plus miles an hour of momentum, so it turned out Ewan could roll it and coast it across the line. It's not going to be a fast time, but you could do it. It was just curiosity, could it make it? The thing is, that wasn't quite the end of it, because, well, the engine hadn't exploded. For some reason, despite being well past 200 miles an hour in 6th gear, it stalled. We're not quite sure how it stalled, presumably something with its bouncing around. The nitro cutting in and out somehow had caused the engine to stall. Ewan just assumed it had exploded, so coasted the whole way. So that was a bit unfortunate for that run. Shadow would be up next. This with the Sunstorm. Now, essentially a wide-body SBR4 with a lot of power. 3,200 horsepower going on in this vehicle. Now, as you can imagine, that is rather dramatic. And unlike some of the other cars here, this thing much more aero, much more planted, much better suited to the demands of this sort of thing. I mean, you can see the bumps. This car really was being thrown about over the bumps here. This is having all sorts of issues. Again, ignore some of the visual. It wasn't overheating at this point. It's just the replays just do not know how to deal with cars going this fast. Of the vehicles that we would witness running through this course, Shadows Sunstorm, while twitchy and while bouncing around it looks uncomfortable, was by far and away one of the easier vehicles to drive, even though the speeds were immense. And all 3 runs would go off without a hitch, the fastest being 308 miles an hour average speed. Again, these are average speeds that the cars are being able to do. That is truly ridiculously fast. Yeah, it looks uncomfortable. Your spine would probably hurt with how much the bumps were chucking it about, but did very, very well. Rusky up next with probably the silliest car you will see here. We have one of the Ladas. This still putting out a respectable amount of power, 1,600 horsepower. Now the thing to bear in mind here with this car, unlike a lot of the rest of ours, this is pretty much a stock car. And I say that barring, of course, the engine and the gearbox and I think the tyres. But the rest of it, like all the suspension setup for everything on it is pretty much the normal base car thing, which, as you can imagine, does have some rather profound effects on the way it's behaving. Although, admittedly, it does give it some bonuses. While it wheelies something horrible, and we can pull absolutely massive wheelies. Something that me and Amy worked very hard to prevent with wheelie bars. I think a couple other cars as well were running wheelie bars that you could properly tune, and both of us had to really work on tuning it. The Rusky was just going to have some wheelies from the Lada and deal with it. I say surprisingly composed, really, for what it is. Now, one of the downsides, though, for the car was while it could have a big engine, it physically couldn't have a big enough radiator to keep the engine cool over the course of the 4 miles, and the engine would blow up. In fact, in this one, it blew up before the finish line. And it was the first run that was actually the fastest for Rusky, averaging 201 miles an hour. And while that might sound somewhat slow in the context of some of the cars running in this, averaging that speed in an old Lada is quite impressive. We then decided to see whether Amy could have a passenger ride. We were always going to go on the magic carpet on the roof, but the better chance was to stay on the bonnet, but it was a bit too fast, really. In case you hadn't seen it, we were not taking this one massively seriously. I mean, the Lada was absolutely ridiculous. You can see how much it wants to wheel. The whole way down the course, it's wanting to lift the front wheels up off of the ground, which makes handling somewhat difficult. It's just absolutely ridiculous. However, I will say, an interesting thing of this one, because of the suspension on this vehicle, the final run, Rusky took all the parts off to make it light as possible to go faster and whatnot. The suspension meant that because it's on basically standard suspension, quite soft, like if this went wide, if this had a problem, which was easy to do around here, it was surprisingly controllable. We'd seen many cars have huge wrecks when falling off the road, but no, the Lada could gather it and get back on the circuit. And even more impressively, despite that off, all 3 runs of Rusky's were within a second of each other. It was remarkably consistent, by far the most consistent of the cars. Admittedly, no actual full-on crashes in this, but yeah, the suspension worked surprisingly well for not having massive wrecks, but there's only so much you can do. Now, I would be running the Bastion in this, the third most powerful car here, 6,800 horsepower in this one. And the first run had got off to a fairly okay start, but a bit too much understeer into the final corner would be my undoing. Trying to gather it would lead to a huge tank slapper and an even bigger smash into the finish line. There was very little in the way of Bastion left. I don't even know you'd be able to tell what this car was without the livery on it after such a big shunt. And I mean, that was not as fast as this car could go. It was brutally quick, as you would imagine this amount of power could put it, but it was not very controllable. The issue with this one, as I didn't go off at the petrol station corner, we had a huge wobble, and somehow we managed to one-up Amy's save of the day going on there. I still do not quite know how the Bastion survived that moment, how I got away with gathering it all back up. The twitchiness and the difficulty in driving this car was immense, especially now that it had lost a rear wheel, and I was determined to finish the run. It's not going to set any sort of speed, good speed here. But having crashed on the first run and almost crashed on the second, I wanted to set at least a run, and again, it was just because I could. The difficulty with the Bastion, however, was the front tyres. I was having handling issues, funnily enough, with this car. If I put big enough front tyres on to have enough front end grip to not understeer, it became unbelievably twitchy because the back end simply didn't have enough grip. So I had to run it with barely any turning. There was barely any front end grip, barely any control in this car. But with nearly 7,000 horsepower, it was a monster when you could use it. And that was really the game with this one. It was trying to use the power. It had nitro that I could barely use as soon as I touched it. But some of that 7,000 horsepower was nitro that I simply couldn't use, or very often, because it was just too dangerous to try and use it. You had to kind of control it carefully into these corners and try and make the most of the power when you could get out of it. And this was the third and final run for me, and I knew we had to not wreck it on this one to try and at least set some sort of comparable competitive speed down here. Once it's, you know, could pick up speed, it would fly down the course, but it was really got to get it slowed for these corners. It was all over the place if you even ever so slightly stepped out of line. So we head around the final quarter. It was a very neat, very tidy final run. Put on the power, turn the nitro on for the run to the line. It was about 300 miles an hour plus across the line. Average speed 281 for the Bastion. A wildly fast car, but a very difficult one to keep in any sort semblance of control. Quite possibly the most difficult to control of the cars here. Well, I gotta say, quite possibly, because the one that would follow was also on the rather wild side. Danger Man was also driving a Sunstorm. Unlike Shadows, though, this one had no aero. Designed for higher top speed, yes, but that does make control issues a little bit greater. As you can see, it is nowhere near as planted as the vehicle that Shadow had created. So while monstrously fast, this one was actually more powerful as well, 3,536 horsepower, and Danger Man would have a big moment, not quite get it right up there, and this is many cartwheels for the Sunstorm, and it would bounce and roll to a rest on the side of the road. Now, to be fair to the man of danger here, they did turn up rather late, and while the rest of us have been building cars and testing cars before our 3 runs for this challenge, Danger Man did not have that luxury. So Danger Man was far less experienced on the course with one of the more difficult to control. So one of the more difficult to control vehicles. The Sunstorms were all-wheel drive, which I believe they're both all-wheel drive, which would help them. But yeah, this thing here is very fast and with no aero. It was easy to have problems. And again, same place. Danger Man did not like this particular section. Of course, it would go off, managing this time around to wrap itself around a lamppost. And there's a small bit of fire. There was a few fires from a variety of different cars in this one. Sunstorm was not, without the aero, was not as easy to drive. Now, as we headed around the final corner, Danger Man had just about kept it together, but a big twitch, not actually on the grass, just a big twitch on their own, would detonate the car. Now, I decided to be kind, and I gave Danger Man the speed because some of the debris did cross the finish line. Now, the average speed for that is 265 miles an hour with the debris crossing the line, which, I mean, the car didn't, but seeing as Danger Man hadn't really had any practice, would be a bit fair and allow that. But anyway, on to a leaderboard. Yes, it was, I mean, the speeds are ridiculous. Shadow would take victory, actually very close at the front. Shadow would take victory at 308 miles an hour from Amy's 303. My Bastion would be third at 281, ahead of Danger Man's Sunstorm, sorry. Although, you know, we'll put an asterisk there because it technically wrecked before the finish line. Shados did very well with the T-Series to get 262 miles an hour out of that one, while Stevie would manage 254 with the Barstow. Ewan's bizarre Hot Wheels contraption would be 7th at 244. Gliscor's attempt at grip, while much easier to drive, could only manage at 236, and the Lada would end up at the bottom, but still over 200 miles an hour. And I thought, out of curiosity, I would also give you the highest speeds obtained by the cars during their run. And, I mean, it's perhaps not a big surprise. While Shadow's car was much easier to drive and much more controllable, Amy's vehicle got close because it could do 370 miles an hour on this course. While my vehicle might be capable of that at some point, I simply didn't have the control to be able to use the power. In fact, it is very interesting to know that Shadow, me, Danger Man, and Shados were all within 4 miles an hour of each other in terms of top speed. Stevie did exceed 300 miles an hour. It was, yeah, just not quite got the control. It's interesting to see how close to their top speed cars were able to hold their average speed as well. But yeah, this was a really fun challenge, I have to say. We all really, really enjoyed this one, and I hope you did too. Making these absolutely crazy contraptions and then trying desperately to cling on to some semblance of control running along this road is one hell of a challenge. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. That, though, is going to be it from me. Thank you all very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.